Hi, I'm Jeff Ranke, Editorial Director of Manufacturing.net and Manufacturing Business Technology. Welcome to Security Breach. Everything old is new again. While that might seem like a natural lead-in for discussing hacker tactics, that same mantra rings true when discussing OT technology and those ever-growing number of connections and Industry 4.0 integrations. That's because Mordor Intelligence recently reported that U.S. manufacturing spent over $307 billion on digital transformation technologies last year, and nearly every research and consulting outlet around the world is predicting that those numbers will rise in 2024. So while this is obviously encouraging and positive, it's just as obvious that all this new software, connectivity, automation, and equipment also creates a familiar challenge when it comes to OT cybersecurity. This meshing of the old and new is something our guest for today's episode is all too familiar with, and he's here to break down everything associated with bringing legacy and next gen together. It's my pleasure to welcome Joshua Williams, Strategic Account Manager at IriusRisk, a leading provider of automated threat modeling solutions, to the show. Joshua, thanks so much for joining us today, and welcome to Security Breach. So one of the main things that we're kind of going back and forth with before we got on camera here is just talking about this, we're bringing in all this new Industry 4.0 technologies, we're expanding the attack surface, and this is a lot of positive stuff, but a lot of manufacturers are really struggling because how do we integrate some of this legacy equipment and systems with a lot of the new stuff and keeping it secure? So I'd kind of be interested to get your perspective on that. I know that's kind of an area that you focus on. How are we doing right now in terms of leveraging the combination of those two from a security perspective? Are we getting better at it, or are there still a lot of concerns out there?
Well, I think that's really great. And start talking about Industry 4.0. I have so much to say about that because I think everything's trending in the right direction. And I think we are moving in the right direction with all of it. However, it is an inevitability, right? Legacy systems and new systems, having to work together for this. And so if I were to give like a report card grade on it, we're probably a C- from what I'm seeing. And I'm looking at things from a design perspective. Now that could come from, kind of the architectural design, the systems integrating the interoperability between them all. And I think a lot of it has to do with, and I don't want to be too bold here, but I think a lot of it has to do with buyer expectations and buyer responsibilities. One of the big things with that is, so my background going back to working for the DOE as a contract there, some other industries where we were in a manufacturing technology building because of the things we worked on some of the nuclear side and stuff like that. Because of that, we took our responsibility as a buyer extremely seriously. It was a non-negotiable. Us that's putting these things into manufacturing, you have to make sure everything it's pinned up right. You have to do all of your due diligence. You have to do all of your testing. So I come at it now from, it's very important from the buyer's perspective to ensure this interoperability and the security in that architecture between the two. So as systems grow, as systems change, as processes grow, it's a big responsibility of the buyer to ensure that interoperability is taken into consideration, is reviewed appropriately, and is putting the right leverage on the supplier to provide these systems for them. So I would say we are doing better, but there's a lot, I think, to be wanted, especially, we can start going down that rabbit hole of supply chain and, what's coming from that. I mean, that's a major hot topic right now, but yeah, if I had to give that report card, I'd say probably a C-. I'm hoping it gets better. I have high hopes.
Yeah. I think we're always trying, obviously, to improve and get better, and there's a lot of room for improvement with that grade that you just gave folks. So, you talked a lot of the onus sort of being on the buyer and managing expectations, but also leaning on the supplier to provide some answers and some input. Is it a situation where maybe the buyers aren't asking the right questions right now when they're looking to integrate this stuff? Do the suppliers need to be more proactive, or where does the onus need to really go right now?
I think you're dead on with that first point of the buyers just kind of asking the right questions, expecting or maybe demanding something back from the supplier. One of the things, talking with an energy company, I don't know, this might have been a year ago now. One of the things that they started looking at is they were starting to say, "Hey, we're going to start asking for threat models from the suppliers of these different controllers we're getting, whatever the names of them might be. So we're going to start to demand this type of material from them. Have you done X, with this threat model? Can we get an output from it? Have you remediated these weaknesses that you found from the threat model?" So all of these types of things they're going to start asking for just to ensure that they're getting that, they're putting in place these systems from the supplier to where now when they go through and kind of work their design, they've already seen what has been mitigated. They've already seen the weaknesses that have been, at least removed from the system. And now they can start from a higher level of modeling their own system and how that interoperability is going to work.
I mean, the term we're sort of dancing around here is secure by design, and that's where you live. That's where you're from. So even though it is sort of this general industry term, I'd kind of like you to give your definition. When you hear the term secure by design, what does that mean to you?
Yeah, and so design is something we all do. Everyone does. That is not a new term, but the idea of secure by design is going to be when you design this, is there security at least in that process? And this is what it could look like, just kind of a high level. So you design a system. You have some sort of system put out into a Visio, AutoCAD, whatever it might be. Now you start asking yourself, well, what can go wrong with this system? Where can a malicious actor take advantage of? Where's the weaknesses? Where do they exist in the system? And the thing is designers, the architects, even developers in the software case, they're, as much as they know about the system, they're usually able to come in and say like, well, you could take advantage of this, or, you can change this thing here and actually make it a bit more secure, because of X, Y, or Z. That type of small interaction in the design phase of any system, that's what I would consider secure by design. I do want to take it a step further and say, it's not only asking those questions, but then you have to take it the step further of like, okay, well, now that we know we could do this, are we willing to accept this risk or put this risk out to a buyer, or what are we going to do about this risk? Or how do we handle this now? What do we do to mitigate? What design can we now change? What part of the architecture can we adjust to make sure that this weakness is remediated? And now we're building good, secure design systems that we have, very happy with suppliers using. What makes it so important, I'm sorry, I'm kind of rambling about this, but what makes that so important, especially in the manufacturing, and this kind of goes back to your first question. Legacy systems are in environments for a long time. I mean, I can remember, working with some testers when I was at Honeywell, where XP has been out of service for a long time, and we're still using XP, and it's not going away. It's not going to go away. It's in this process. It's in this system, and we can probably think of many other things in our systems where it's these legacy components, these legacy systems. They're not going to go away. You have to learn to work with them. So what that tells us now, as we're building systems, manufacturing things today, is the things we put in, they're going to be around for a long time. Yeah. That's why I think secure by design is such an important part here, is to ensure that we build for longevity, security across a long life cycle.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring that up. And we've had people refer to the term OT as old tech, and they were said it in kind of a disparaging manner. But in the context that you just gave it there, it makes a little more sense, really, from a practical perspective. Next thing I got here for you, Josh, and this is more of a comment that I'd like to get your perspective on. When we look about procurement in cybersecurity, the OT guys are used to asking a lot of the questions that you just outlined there. These are things that they're going to ask when they're bringing in anything from a conveyor belt to an ICS or anything else. But a lot of organizations, and I'm not bashing IT folks in any way, shape, or form, but it's a different type of question that they're used to asking as opposed to the OT side. So it just seems to make it so much more important that we get better at bringing OT and IT together. And I know there's been a lot of advances there, but I'd be curious to see from your perspective in working with industrial organizations, is that maybe one of the issues that we're having in making sure that secure by design is being realized?
I think so. I think so. And I'll say when I first started in at a manufacturing plant, OT, they had an OT, a few people on the OT team, and they were a part of IT, but nobody knew what they did. Nobody understood what was going on. They were over in a corner. And, in reality, if you didn't see them at like a company party, you forgot they even were around, right? They lived in this whole world completely outside of us. And so what I think is exactly to your point, and I will say that that's changed. And what I think is my optimistic outlook to it is that I think we're seeing those lines converge a bit. I think it's being led by technology. I mean, naturally, we're seeing IT organizations, IT vendors, IT technology being put into OT. That comes with a whole basket of, new things to deal with that could be, detrimental. But what that is doing is that's getting, the IT profession or that OT side of things in with the IT professionals who know how to answer some questions, but know some to ask. The OT has their own expertise they can put in, and that melding together, I think, is going to be one of the biggest leaps we have in ensuring good, proper cybersecurity across ICS, across manufacturing technology type organizations and teams.
Yeah, got to keep working together there. I just think that point you made about asking the right questions beforehand as opposed to trying to figure it out once you get it in place. Because once you get it in place, you're worried about, does it work? Does it function the way we want it to? Security almost becomes an afterthought, which is why we're having a lot of these problems now when it comes to OT security. Which leads me to my next question here. What are some of the bigger things, vulnerability-wise, that we're seeing right now in trying to combine some of these legacy systems with the new tech? We've seen everything. Everybody's talking about endpoint security. There's been, due to the recent Unitronics scare, make sure you're not using default passwords that were just left in place when you were plugging everything together. But have you seen other stuff, I guess, that continues to be a real issue in terms of defending the OT landscape?
Yeah, I mean, you hit the first one, just the authentication practices, right? Of just default passwords. That one is an initial weakness pulled into being a vulnerability that I feel like, that's the kind of an easy low hanging fruit. The dealing with legacy systems also, you usually have like a protocol mismatch, or you have this kind of idea of protocols being used that might not should have been used for that purpose. And so now what we're dealing with is maybe protocols that are being used in a very insecure way. Now they can be taken advantage of. Now there's control mechanisms that can be put through it, when in reality, it's not meant for that. So there's kind of this interoperability that we want and we need, and it's really good for us, but we're probably using some older tech that I see causing some vulnerabilities. I think the very common, and I kind of, we talked about it just a little bit ago, but the idea of bringing IT systems into the OT world, that melding, which again, I think it's got all the upside. It's got a lot of great upside, but that's attack surface. To me, that's one of the biggest vulnerabilities we have to start looking at is now how do we deal with a greater attack surface in the OT world that it's not normally used to contending with? To me, I feel like that's very obvious, but I think that's something we have to really review. We have to really take the time and understand. And understanding, hey, there's these protocols being used, these older protocols being used for these different types of maybe control mechanisms. Well, now we might not be able to secure the protocol, but we can build this defense in depth around it. But so those vulnerabilities, protocol mismatch, the authentication, default username and password, the idea of spreading IT components, tech into OT, just increasing that attack surface. I think another one is lack of monitoring. That's another vulnerability that's just kind of naturally built in. It's just that lack of monitoring. How do we monitor these systems and ensure, that the things that we're expecting to happen are happening, and we don't see any kind of anomalous behavior where, okay, now we need to take action on it. So I feel like I just kind of spit a bunch at you, but and I feel like some of them are very obvious, but sometimes, especially with OT, it's easy to forget. And so you have to kind of sometimes just restate these obvious ones, like, hey, have we changed default username and password? What protocols are we? Is there a way to secure this? No. How do we build defense in depth around it? And I think those questions just need to be just reviewed and on the top of mind when we go through designing and enhancing these systems.
I think that's one of the one of the biggest evolutions in OT cybersecurity is that those conversations are happening more frequently. It's not just once in a while. It's not just, hey, what are we doing there type of thing. It's an ongoing conversation, which is positive, and it brings up a lot of the things that you were just mentioning there. I want to circle back to monitoring a little bit. Do you feel the lapse in monitoring, does that stem from the fact that we're not great at always doing the really the lowest of hanging fruit, which is asset management, understanding all of our inventory and all of our connection points? Or is that just a case where we forget we should be doing that? Is it just because the attack surface has gotten so big and there's so much to monitor, it just becomes a lower priority? Is it one of those two things or maybe something else?
Man, yes. I think you're dead on. I mean, well, let me kind of say it, because being from the IT side initially, growing up as a developer and then into networking and into security and kind of moving in from that IT route, for me, learning what SCADA was, learning what these access gateways were actually doing, kind of what was all happening in the back end. For me, I was just like, yeah, IP's IP. We do everything through IP, but then learning, well, wait, behind this gateway are all these different systems, and they're accessible. It was huge for me. It was a big eye-opening experience for me. I believe there's this kind of idea of, yeah, sometimes it's just forgotten a little bit, but at the same time, it's growing. I mean, we can go to plenty of different manufacturing plants, and we can see, the manufacturing side, the OT side is growing, and that's good for business. That's necessary for business. So we can't stop the growth. We have to get that access. We have to understand what that is. But a lot of it, I think, has to do also with kind of a third thing here I think is worth considering is, because we kind of talked about this a bit already, is these legacy systems just don't have a good way of monitoring. What do we do about some of these older systems where there's just not good log output. There's just not good interaction with them. 10 years ago, we weren't thinking about telemetry for a lot of these systems. Now some of the newer systems all have, for better or worse, a good, function to where they can send telemetry data out. You can have a good HMI where you're able to read all of this wonderful stuff, all exposure. But at the end of the day, that legacy system probably it wasn't built with this type of monitoring visibility in mind. So I think it's kind of, that's the trifecta of it all. Yeah. A lot of stuff out there, it's continually growing. A lot of the people that are doing the monitoring tend to forget and just not see it. It's just kind of not top of mind. And then, systems just aren't ready or just weren't built with monitoring.
Yeah. Well, that kind of brings up another comment that was made in our last episode. And I know this is a little bit of a loaded question, but you mentioned how some of these legacy systems are just not meant to do some of the things we want to do. We have monitoring issues. We have inventory management concerns when it comes to all these connection points. Are we over-connected on the OT side? I know we want to leverage all of this ability to share information and grab data. Have we gone a step too far? Do we need to step back a little bit?
Well, I think you're going to judge me on my cybersecurity prowess based on this answer because I say no. I mean, I don't believe we are. Here's why, and this is from my experience. There is so much upside to having, to having this type of connectivity in.
Yeah,
it is an important business feature. Being able to monitor your chillers, being able to know what's going on when it's happening, being able to have historical data, being able to create more efficient operations. That is going to happen, and it needs to happen. It's good for business. It's good for, if we were to talk about, utility companies, public works utility companies, as scared as we are of something happening to our water system, I think one of the important things is that we still have good, efficient working water systems that get better.
Yeah.
So whenever I look at it, I say, yeah, it is kind of scary and that's a lot of work. But at the end of the day, I think being connected is better. I think having this information is better. I'm very optimistic about it. And I think there's so much more upside to having it connected than the downside. However, in 2030, if everything hits the fan, don't come back to this and say like, oh boy, that dude, he should have been so optimistic about it. But I am optimistic about it. I think the connectivity is good ultimately for business for all of us.
Yeah, and I'll take the ultimate like waffling response to that one, because I think as an industry, as this industry sector, we do need more connectivity. There's, if you take a wide swap at everything there and just say overlapping concern or response, manufacturing needs more connectivity, and we need to continue going down that route. I think there are some organizations, individual organizations, who need to look a little bit more closely at everything that they have connected to the internet and really delve into if all of that is necessary. I think it is a very individual dynamic. Overall, I think we're on the right track and need to continue down this road of greater connectivity. Once in a while, we go a little too far, and the bad guys figure it out. So that's a little bit of, I guess, I'm probably too far in the middle there. Maybe I need to take a stronger stance.
No, and I think I heard it. I think it was on y'all's last podcast where, y'all are talking about, there's like dishwashers plugged in with Bluetooth, okay, I'm with you there. There are some IoT devices where, because I think my washing machine does it. And my wife and I were talking about it. This is months ago, but she was like, should I have it? I'm like, for what? Like, what? Like, do you want to get a ding on your iPhone every time the dryer's finished? Like, it already plays like this little beautiful digital tune for us. Like, do you need another thing for knowing that things are dry? So, and with that in mind, I believe there is a point to where we're going too far. But at the end of the day, I come from this idea of like the more data, the better. The more we can measure, the better. The more historical information, the better. And so that's probably why I trend in that direction. But don't tell me my dishes are done from my dishwasher. Don't care to know that.
I'm with you there. So this has been awesome, Josh. Maybe you can talk to us a little bit as well about some of the things that IriusRisk is doing to help support cybersecurity in the OT sector.
Yeah, absolutely. So IriusRisk works, and we do threat modeling, just kind of quick and simple, and we help automate that process. One of our core tenets or one of our core values is threat model everything. And for everyone I think of it a lot like Sherwin-Williams, for those familiar with their logo, right? It's it's paint the world. And I think of it like that, threat model the world. And that's what we're really, really leaning into, is how do we threat model things on many different levels, granular as you need, as broad as you need to have it. But the idea is, especially from an ICS, from a manufacturing perspective, what we have in IriusRisk are predefined components, very kind of general type components to very specific type actuator, using this type of connection, those types of components and connectors in our platform to help you quickly go from 0 to 1 when it gets to threat modeling, which I think is the greatest distance to cross. That's, it's kind of weird, but I like to say 0 to 1 is greater than 1 to 2. Because just getting started is extremely important. It's extremely beneficial. It's so fruitful. And that's what IriusRisk we're really trying to do, especially on industrial controls. So we're helping get you just started with the process of threat modeling an industrial system or a control system. But secondly, we have standards in place. IEC 62443, for example. We have standards in place that help you not just ensure that, hey, we've done the threat modeling, but we're also building the system to a specific standard in which that you might have to report that standard. You might have a government regulatory body or some kind of regulatory body that is coming down saying, hey, you need to ensure, thou shall threat model. So if you need to show that report, if you need to have that artifact in hand, we're helping you get to, hey, here's how we can show you not only did you do this, but you did this to this standard. And we can help you build that report and hand it off to your auditors. So that way you have that correct artifact and you're able to make your life in an audit a lot easier, which is something we all want anyway, right?
Absolutely. So it's interesting with the threat modeling there. Have you seen any interesting trends in terms of different types of threats that have sort of risen in prominence, or areas that folks are more focused on in the industrial sector?
Yeah, there's a couple that I think are probably common. And I have this dream of threat modeling kind of in this circular logic with threat intelligence and kind of current vulnerabilities and what's going on. And I think there is this kind of circular relationship between the two. If we know what's actively happening, we know the groups that are actively out there, the techniques that they're using, then we know how to batten down the hatches as we build new systems or as we're integrating legacy and modern systems together. We know what we need to be looking for. So I think one informs the other, which creates a better system. So with that, I would say a lot of what I like to use and I hear people using is basically they're going to MITRE groups. Sure. APT33, very famous one, right? Sandworm. That's recent. With the Ukraine, with the Petya stuff with Ukraine and kind of attacking that electrical system. So there's a lot that are still pretty active, and obviously due to things going on elsewhere in the world, you can usually look towards those actors and say, hey, obviously they got to bend towards this kind of attack. But what's great is being able to use. Hey, we can look at APT33 and see the techniques they're using. We can look, at Cozy Bear and see what they're using. So, APT33, Sandworm, those are all pretty common. And when you look at the techniques, and this is what I think is extremely important to understand, is when you look at the techniques, a lot of them are not using zero-day attacks. A lot of them are using non-zero-day type vulnerabilities, which means, okay, we know they're interested in these things with Windows. So patching, right? We gotta implement patching. We need to do this when we're designing the system. We need to make sure these processes are in place for when are we going to patch? How are we going to patch? What's the expectation? And so I would say, when it comes to groups and vulnerabilities, really the way I like to look at it is let's find the groups that are active in the industry. Let's go and grab those techniques. Let's use those techniques to help fuel us as we're reviewing weaknesses. And then let's start making sure that we're defining here, just batten down the hatches because we know where the attacks are most likely to come from. So I like to use one to influence the other. Not that we're, the goal of secure design is to not build vulnerabilities. It's to use that type of stuff to reduce the vulnerabilities at build. So we're not producing any.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. In introducing this episode, I talked about everything old is new. And you bring up Sandworm. That's not a new tactic. I mean, that's been around since Stuxnet, essentially. I mean, it's not a new thing, but it works, so the hackers are going to keep going to it. And if we keep letting it happen, that continues to be an issue, obviously. You brought up a lot of different interesting things that are going on from a nation-state perspective. Obviously, things around the Middle East, things in Ukraine are having a direct impact on, I would say, the evolution of some of these, whether it's malware or other cyber tools that the hackers are using. Is that something that you see playing a bigger part maybe going forward as well? As more of these global situations become more intense, there's bleed over into the industrial sector.
Absolutely. And well, not my hot take, but maybe kind of a bold statement. If you work in industrial controls or any kind of public utility, the target's on your back. You are on the front line of cyber war, right? I mean, what was it? 2012, I think, when we defined cyber as like another domain of warfare. That puts everyone that is connected on the front line of the battle space. Public utilities, industrial controls, that is by far the edge of that is the biggest target on the front line. And so with that, I think what becomes extremely important to kind of go on about it is ensuring that we have done the due diligence on our end, that the systems we put in place are battened down, are hardened as much as possible to give that utility, that industrial business, that, whatever we're building, whatever the business is, to ensure that it has the best chance possible to survive a cyber war. And I know I'm really being choosy with my words here because I don't want it to sound too doom and gloom of, all the war is coming. But I mean, it is. It is that.
It's here.
It's here. Absolutely. Yeah. And I almost feel, and this is kind of the bold statement, is I almost feel we have an ethical duty to absolutely go in, review these as much as possible, design as good as possible, or as well. I don't know. From Oklahoma, I don't have good grammar, but design these systems really well to ensure that we are putting things in front of the enemy, basically, that gives that business the best chance possible, and our customers, because ultimately that's what ends up happening. We talked earlier about the buyer-supplier relationship. As a supplier, as a builder of things, you owe it to that customer to build something that is, that will withstand the cyber war, the forthcoming cyber war, or whatever it might be. So man, I feel like I rambled about that, but at the end of the day, the responsibility is heavy, and that's what I feel. That I feel the responsibility being, extremely kind of a heavy burden, but it's a necessary burden. Somebody's going to have to pick it up. Somebody has to shoulder it, and that's why I love the industry we're in. Is because it's important work, and it's difficult work. It's never done.
And I bring this up because I think sometimes when we talk about some of these cyber activities that are going on in these war zones, somebody who produces, hardware in Arizona is thinking that is a world away, that is not my sector, that doesn't pertain to me. But it comes right back to what we started off this conversation when it comes to secure by design, that shared responsibility between the buyer and the seller to be asking questions and having that dialogue. Because essentially, you're not just hardening your infrastructure, you're not just hardening your company, your enterprise, you're helping everybody else out. And that's how we can try to at least keep pace with the bad guys and all this other stuff that they're doing, because they're operating at a very high level in all of these areas. When it comes to, attacking PLCs used in wastewater treatment, they can say all they want that was against the Israeli-based applications, but it affected everyone around the world. So asking those questions, making sure we're secure by design, I think that all bleeds together in a much bigger picture. So I think a lot of things you said there made a lot of sense.
Absolutely. I'm glad it did, because sometimes I get, this is something, especially my time in the Marine Corps, my time with, Honeywell and contracting for, government agencies. That's just kind of the way I think. And sometimes I get afraid, like, man, am I being overbearing about it? Am I being, the war's coming, everybody, I don't want to be the old man yelling at the clouds here. Yeah. But at the end of the day, it's what I observe. It's what I've observed in the past. Kind of, I look at it like, this becomes extremely important. That's why, I talked about, the buyer, it's your responsibility. Ultimately, you're putting the system together. Now, that means you have to ask the right questions to the supplier. You have to know what your process is going to be for that interoperability, that integration. And if you're not asking those right questions, then, hey, let's get in a room together. Let's get big brains together and let's work it out. Because I feel, for the most part, I know we haven't really talked about it, but I know that there's this cyber skilling kind of gap. This where's the skill bit? The thing is across all parts of the organization, from analysts to architects and whatever else, there's a lot of smart people that if you give them the chance, you put them in the room, they're probably going to come up with some great ideas for, hey, this is probably a way we should design. This is probably a good idea for implementation and how to produce, deeper defense across this. And that's probably what gives me the most hope is seeing younger people, kind of new in the industry, new in their job, able to produce great ideas and great thought. And, sometimes it's just, hey, let's just get people together, because this will work if we put our brains together.
No, absolutely. It's the same dynamic with IT and OT, getting them all in a room and talking. And a situation like this, again, leveraging all of that internal talent potentially. And as far as being the old man yelling at the clouds, I feel for you there too, because I still go back to an experience I had. It was a little over a year ago. I was at an automation conference. These are plant managers, facility managers, automation engineers. And we had somebody up there giving an excellent presentation talking about the current threat landscape for the OT sector. And folks were a lot more interested in their cold turkey and mashed potatoes than they were about what this individual was talking about. So it is concerning. Sometimes you do have to raise the level of your voice a little bit. And I think when it comes to getting people anxious and worried and everything else, education overcomes that. Going back again to what you were just talking about, have the conversation. Once you understand the situation, that's going to quell a lot of those anxieties, and we can stop worrying about what's going to happen and focus on the solutions. So I think there's a lot to that.
I think Stuxnet did a good job of scaring people into. Let me finish my sentence. I didn't mean to pause. Stuxnet was great. I didn't mean to pause there, but Stuxnet did a good job of really opening up the eyes of, wow. So wait a second, a USB, and it's like, USB, right? Like that simple, right? Yeah. That simple. So I think there's this idea of, maybe just something loud, like, raising the voice at the conference, or, hey, here's how easy it is, everybody. This, and that's what I usually liked about tabletop reviews is when you do a tabletop, if you can keep the attention of people, it's like, look, this is how easy something can spiral out of control. One small event can spiral and be, the reputation of the business could be, the customers could be, look at Colonial Pipeline. That one is, very, very strong case of how something can really spiral out of control.
Absolutely. So Josh, this has been awesome. Kind of wrapping up things here a little bit. What do you see as some of the bigger trends over the next year and a half that are going to impact OT cybersecurity?
I'm not going to say AI. I'm not going to say it. I hope you weren't looking for that one, because I feel like everyone's pontificated enough on that. I'm not going to say it. If you want me to, I will. But I'm going to. What I think, and maybe I'm being a little biased and optimistic about it more so, but I do see the trend moving in this direction, and that's along the idea of supply chain, just focusing on supply chain security. Because that comes from a hardware and a firmware software perspective. Where are we getting things from? What is our fourth party suppliers doing? Are they doing it correctly? Are they able to provide for us their processes for, how they're ensuring this is built? From the buy. This happened actually when one of my first times with, I won't talk about who it was really, but, we were buying for very specific, important, manufacturing networks. We were buying, switches and routers from a reputable, third party channel or value added reseller. We were buying from them, this major kind of switching manufacturer. And so we were, when we would get them, we noticed that there was tampering on the system. So we, worked with the actual producer of the system and, did some hashing across it and came to find out that this is an actual tampered system. It came in a nice box. Everything looked right. And if it wasn't for a small little detail, we probably would have thrown them into our manufacturing network and we never really found out what would have gone on or really what was completely tampered with. So when I think of supply chain, this is not new. What I'm talking about, that incident happened, 10, 11 years ago now. And so supply chain's not new, but we're starting to really focus on it. And I'm very optimistic about it. I really believe, we've talked about the buyer supplier relationship. I really, truly believe that that's where we're going to see great increase, and that's where we're going to get great value from. So like I said, I don't know if we'll see like major changes in 12 to 18 months. I think we're going to see positive changes. And I think that, optimistically, I'm saying that that's where we're going to get our biggest value from. And I really look forward to that focus.
Well, it's important to say supply chains because even if you're not thinking about it, the hackers have figured it out. Just ask some of the folks at like Dole and JBS and some of these other large food companies in particular. They've seen stuff really slow down because people went at a contract manufacturer. They went at a logistics supplier, and they're feeling the effects. So, great point.
Yeah. And when I talk about, threat modeled everything, that's something that can be modeled very easily is, What can go wrong with this supply chain? What can go when we implement this new component or this new, IT system or this new OT type, controller? What are the things that can go wrong? And so I think that kind of comes back to secure design. It helps us figure out the right questions to ask. It helps us figure out how to put the system together, and it helps us understand maybe there is just a natural weakness in here. And again, we just have to build around it and we have to defend around it, because all risk is not bad risk. You just have to figure out what are we going to accept, and then how will we mitigate, from, around it. We'll accept this risk from the supplier. At least we know how to defend. And I think that's probably one of the most important things that come out from a secure design practice in the supply chain, kind of affecting positively that supply chain relationship.
Thanks. And for more information on the work Joshua and his colleagues are up to, you can check them out at IriusRisk.com. That's IRIUS risk.com. Also like to thank you for joining us today, and to catch up on past episodes, you can go to manufacturing.net, IEN.com, or mbtmag.com. You can also check Security Breach out wherever you get your podcasts, including Apple, Amazon, and Overcast. And if you have a cybersecurity story or topic that you'd like to have us explore in Security Breach, you can reach me at jeff@IEN.com. For Josh Williams, I'm Jeff Reinke, and this is Security Breach.